Alright, today we're gonna talk about some basic shit that you should have learned years ago, but you didn't, and now you have to rely on me, which is not a good thing. But I can't even explain to you how much anger I have for all you motherfuckers who don't even know how to shade, and you keep throwing in these random colors and values and everything ends up looking muddy as fuck. Like going to Instagram and looking at your art feels like going to a farm and watching a bunch of pigs rolling in the mud. And I don't like pork. So today we're gonna cover the fundamentals of shading. I'm gonna talk about some of the rules that you have to follow. I'm gonna show you one of the best shading exercises, and then I'm gonna show you how I did the process of this artwork. And no, I'm not gonna twerk. Yeah, not today, bitch. Alright, let's say we have this bowl. It can be an egg, it can be a nut, whatever the fuck you choose. This is gonna be the local value, aka how dark or light something is without any light. So when you introduce a light source or a lightning source, you get a drop shadow. That's the shadow that's produced from the object because it's being hit by the light and shit. And the first thing that's gonna happen to this object is that there's gonna be shadow where the light source cannot hit it. Duh. And on the other side, naturally you're gonna have some light. But when you're adding both the light and the shadow, you have to be thinking about the form of the object. So let's say that the lightning source is coming from here. The lighter part of the bow is not gonna be on the edge because it's actually circular. So this shit is gonna hit it right here in the middle. And also when there's a shadow on a circular bow, the shadow is not gonna be straight like this, but it's actually gonna be curved around the form of the bow. Okay? So then what's gonna happen is that this lightning source is gonna hit all of the other shit that's actually around the bow, considering that it's not in space and shit. And this whole surface that's around the bow is gonna get this light and it's gonna reflect it back at the bow. That's why you can actually see anything in the shadows, because if there was no reflective light, the shadows are gonna be like pure darkness, like the moon. But I don't know, I don't really do science and shit. So this is what you call reflective light, and it's one of the most powerful tools for making an object look 3D. The problem that people have is that they think that reflective light is gonna be as light as the normal light. So they just color pick this light from here, they add it to here, and they're like, woo, Jesus is gonna save us with all this light. So as a rule of thumb, reflective light will always be darker than the normal light, and it's usually somewhere as dark as the local value. And a trick that I often use is actually, instead of adding reflective light, I just go to the shadow, I erase parts of it, and you think that this is reflective light, but it's actually the local color. And that actually stops you from adding all of this unnecessary light into the reflection and making it all wrong and shit. So reflective light is super useful, but usually people find out about it and they try to unnecessary flex and they overdo it. So because of this shit with the reflective light, actually the darkest part of the bow is not gonna be on the bottom, but it's actually gonna be in the middle, right where the color transitions from a mid-tone to the shadow, and that's what you call a core shadow. So when you're drawing, it's really useful to actually exaggerate all of this core shadow that you're seeing in the reference, so you can make everything look even more 3D. And with the drop shadow, you're gonna have something similar, where the closer that the shadow gets to the object, the darker the value gets. That's what I call a drop core, not to be mistaken for hardcore, which is something that I'm gonna teach you next time, or on Pornhub. And finally, you have the highlight. That's like the cherry on top. Motherfuckers always love to add that shit in the beginning and totally ruin their work. And something really interesting about the highlight is that, again, it's not gonna be on the edge of the bow, but it's actually gonna be sitting at a 90-degree angle from where the light source is hitting the bow and it's hitting your eye. Again, some science shit that I don't really understand. And sometimes you might see what's called rim light, and that's gonna be sitting on the edge because it's actually produced by a lightning source that's gonna be sitting behind the object. And it's actually super useful to make all of your portraits stand out, but it's pretty much everything. People don't know how to fucking use it. And if they do, they fucking overuse it. So those are all of the fundamentals of shading. And whenever you're adding any type of a brush stroke on your portrait, it needs to be one of those things. I swear, I don't want to see anybody doing some random fucking brush strokes like, what are you doing? I'm just trying to fix something. Okay, now let's talk about the rules for shading. And I know that sounds like some made up shit by me, and that's because it is. Rule number 1, follow the shading order, especially if you're a fucking beginner. So last time we talked about the steps that you need to follow to do a sketch, and now I'm gonna show you the steps that you need to follow to do some shading. And the first and most important step would be the local color. You cannot get into shading unless you separate your character in the background. I swear, the amount of times that I see people do a little fucking nose rendering, and bitch, you don't even have the hair. What's wrong with you? So after you have the local color, your next job is to separate the lights and the shadows. So I have a normal layer with a brush, just adding shadows. I swear, if I catch anybody using some multiply or another blending mode, I'ma eat your dick. Actually, is that really a threat though? And as I mentioned before, as I'm adding the shadows, I'm actually erasing parts of them to really show the reflective light through the local color. And that actually speeds up your process a lot. And something really important is when you're doing the local color and the shadows, do not make the background too dark. Everything in painting is relative. And if you have a super dark ass background, it's gonna throw off all of your values. So keep the background at around 40-50%, and then I'll usually make the local color darker than the background, so the portrait actually stands out. And then when you have the basic shadows, you go in and you add the core shadows. And because now you have some darker values in the portrait, you can actually make the background darker. But again, build up the value. Don't ever start with the blackest black or the whitest white. Just build up everything separately. So as we talked about, the core shadows are going to be the places where the mid-tone is actually transitioning to a shadow. So all of these places with red are actually going to be darker than the normal shadow, and when you add that, it's gonna make everything a lot more 3D. And along with the core shadows, you're gonna have everything that I'm drawing with blue right now, and that's gonna be the drop shadows. So all of these places is what's gonna make your portrait stand out. It's not the fucking lights and the highlights. That shit is a bonus. This is what makes your portrait 3D. Fucking scratches. So make sure that you really study what core and drop shadows are and really have them there before adding any amount of light. And then when you have all of the structure with the shadows, when you add the light, it makes everything a lot more special. And people are like, wow, what happened? I just learned some shadows, bitch. And when I'm adding the light, I'm treating it the same way as if I'm adding shadows. It's just all about you adding value on top of the structure. It's not about you trying to fix your painting. And if you're still a beginner, you might want to stay only in the shadows parts, because the more lights you add, the fucking more complicated it gets. And then finally, I'll add some highlights and transitions on top. But really, that's such a small... The demon is back. But really, that's such a small part of the whole painting that if you have everything set up, it's gonna be much easier to add those. So when you're doing shadows, just think about the shadows. And when you're doing the lights, just think about the lights. And when you're doing the highlights, just think about the highlights. We're really just trying to take the whole creativity out of this shit and make you follow some steps so you learn it faster. Fuck your creativity. So make sure that you follow the shading order. And if you don't, and your paintings keep getting messier, don't say I didn't warn you. Rule number 2 is never paint over your lines. If you're trying to make a beautiful painting or render some shit out, you might want to paint over your lines. But the whole reason for this exercise is for you to learn how to shade and learn about structure. So I always keep my lines on top, pure black, and I just might drop the opacity a little bit or erase some of the parts that look too rough. But really, people that don't know how to shade and they paint over their lines, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna solve the problem now. It's too late now, bitch. That's why I always say practice the lay-in and the planes first, so when you get to shading, you have to worry only about shading and not your lines looking like a pig in the mud. Rule number 3, don't learn shading with a soft brush. I know all you pussy whips out there keep using the soft brush and you think you're getting somewhere, but I promise you, you're not. Because when you're shading with a soft brush, what you're really saying is, I don't really know where all of these planes are and I don't know how to shade, so instead I'm just gonna shade everything with a gradient like a little bitch. So stay away from the soft brush and get you a hard one, maybe the brick or maybe something round, but make sure that it has hard edges so you can learn this shit. Rule number 4, shade planes, not forms. So that kind of goes back to the whole problem with the soft brush. When people are shading, they're like, woo, I'm gonna shade the cheekbones. And they're not really thinking about the planes of the cheekbone, but they're just shading it as if it's a normal bow. And that's why all of your portraits end up looking flat, because you keep shading them them like a ball sack. So instead, learn about the planes of the head that I talked a million fucking times about. And when shading, actually think about the form of the plane that you're shading instead of just doing some regular ass, bitch ass shading. Shade like a man. Or a lesbian. Rule number 5, shading the direction of planes. So for example, when you have the cheekbone plane, this one right here, it only has 2 directions, this one and this one. And when you're shading, you have to choose either one of them and either shade this way or shade that way, but not fucking in the middle. Because what happens is when people are shading, they're not even aware of these planes, so they just keep shading in one direction or sometimes random ones, and your painting just ends up looking like it was carved by the butcher or something. Yeah, that's not a good look. So focus on learning the planes and deciding which direction you're gonna go. This one or this one. No fucking diagonals. The diagonals? Diagonally? Harry Potter? Rule number 6, always use the biggest brush possible. Another thing that people do that totally tickles my ass, not in a good way, is that they keep using these small ass brush strokes, what I call fucking chicken scratching, shading everything in small circles and making your whole portrait looks like it has acne. So again, think about the form and shape and direction of the plane that you're shading and just use the biggest brush possible and just do it in one brush stroke. Don't fucking go there and chicken scratch the fuck out of it. So this whole shadow layer is done in like 10 brush strokes. Just learn where the planes are, do them in one brush stroke, and you're done in like 5 minutes. I wish my sex time was that long too. Rule number 7, use the eraser to sculpt. So a lot of people think that the eraser is for only fixing mistakes, but I actually use it as much, if not even more, than the brush tool. And when I'm shading a plane, I'm doing a bigger brush stroke than necessary, and I go in with an eraser and I actually shape it. So that way, every time I start a shadow layer or a core shadow or lights, I'm starting a new layer and I'm using my eraser to sculpt my brush strokes. And that actually saves me a lot of time because instead of me adding reflective light, for example, I add shadows and then I erase the places where I don't want that darkness and I create reflective light. Rule number 8. I can't count that much. Rule number 8, don't try to fix mistakes. I know this sounds kind of counterproductive, but there's a lot of wisdom in it. You just have to think about it. So as I mentioned before, you really need to break this down into steps and just focus on whatever step you're doing right now. I feel like a lot of people don't really know what they're doing and they're kind of chaotic and they're like, I'm doing the hair and I'm doing the nose, and they just waste a bunch of time trying to fix their mistakes instead of just focusing on whatever the fuck they're doing right now. See, I told you it sounded kind of smart. Don't try to make the most pretty portrait ever. Just focus on learning this shit and investing your time so you can utilize it later. I don't even know what that word means. Finally, rule number 9, always think about the edge. So every time I'm doing a brush stroke, you have to think not only about the plane, the direction, the size, but you also have to think about the edge that it's making with the other planes next to it. So for example, this cheekbone is gonna have 4 edges. Which of them are gonna be soft and which of them are gonna be hard? And this rule is one of the most important ones for making your work look from beginner to advanced. Because there's nothing that screams beginner's work more than just making everything soft and not understanding edges. So every time I make a brush stroke, as I said, I'm using a hard brush and an eraser and I make all of the edges hard. And if I want to soften something, I'm using the smudge tool, this one, skin, to really blend those edges to the next plane. And that's how you get an almost finished look without actually rendering and making everything muddy. So these are all of the rules for shading. Make sure that you follow them because otherwise you're just gonna go to hell. Now let's talk about how to practice shading if you've never done this shit before. And even if you did, you've done it wrong. So this shit right here is a grayscale and you have to learn how to do that with only using black and white and without picking any colors in the middle. And the reason is that when people are shading, they don't know how to control their brush or the color that they're using. So they just keep picking some random ass colors and for 100 times just making everything muddy. You muddy ass little bitches. So what you do is you get 10 little boxes, you get the background to 50%, and you get the color black. You get your brush bigger than the squares, and starting with the first one, you're trying to get the value on the left with just pressing lightly. And this exercise trains not only your hand to know how hard to press, but it also teaches your eye the difference in values. And you might get little rough spots like this. It means that you're the devil, but don't change your value, just keep it with black and keep going over and over again. And when you're done, you can actually go in and color pick the swatches that you did and check the accuracy with the percentages. And remember what I said in the Photoshop tutorial? How the fuck are you gonna do that shit with a hue cube? Then you get the color white and you do the same on top. And I know it's boring, but this is how you learn shit, alright? It's not supposed to be fun. I swear, if I only catch somebody having fun with this. Alright, so these are the fundamentals, the rules, the shading exercise, and my process for shading portraits. And if you want to download any of these files like PSDs and steps, there's gonna be a free download link in the description. Also, I know this shit was useful because you wouldn't have been watching up until now, unless it's for my pretty face. But if you're looking for some critiques and some extra help with this, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/angelganef. You can support me here. I also have a mentorship. I have a special beach tier where I do weekly live stream tutorials. I do critiques. Just check it out. And you know, I was a little bit too cocky last month. I reached $1,000, but then it dropped to 900. So now I need your help. So check it out, patreon.com/angelganef, link in the description. Thank you for fucking watching. I'm gonna see you next time, you dirty bitch.